And given that the discussion and the theme of today's talk is the essence of the changing world, I decided to share my thoughts on how the EdTech space is going to change the world to a better place, and how I believe that EdTech will allow us to deliver mass intelligence to people at scale. And I'll start with a question of how do we think the future is going to look like? I mean, we're always thinking of when new innovations happen on how could that evolve in the future. And I'll take you back first to the year 1899, which is around 100 years ago, when a group of artists were commissioned to draw their own visualization of how they thought the future is going to look like. And I'm going to show you two pictures right now that were done by these artists. What do you see in this picture? What I see is a man speaking to a phone that's interconnected to a speakerphone one way or another that is connected to a typewriter that's typing up something on paper. Probably this is what these artists thought at the time speech-to-text technology could look like. What about this one? What I see is books being put into a grinding machine that are then being manually grinded, and then somehow being passed onto the wires that are either being downloaded as information to people's minds or just hearing some audiobooks. And probably this is how they thought audiobooks are going to look like. Now, as human beings, we tend to think of how new innovations are going to look like as soon as they're introduced. And if we think of the TV, and when the TV first came out, essentially it was the digitization of theaters that were played on a theater like this and being digitized on a TV, to the extent that, for those of us who remember, when TV was first launched, literally the curtains would open, and that's how we'd watch that film at the time. And obviously that has evolved into Hollywood production movies and sitcoms and shorter form content and TikTok reels and Instagram and all of that. And it has come a very long way since the introduction of theater on TV. Now, you're probably all wondering, I mean, what does that have to do with EdTech? I believe that EdTech is in a very similar state to when TV was first introduced, and the theatrical plays were played on TV. Can anyone spot the difference between these two pictures? It's 70 years. This picture was taken in 1950, this picture was taken in 2020. You can see that so much time has passed, yet so little has changed in the world of education. And you can argue that what's happening right now in the education space is a bit similar to what was happening with TV and theater, where predominantly lessons are being digitized from the offline world to be displayed on laptop screens and iPads and smartphones and all of that. But the good news is that the future is going to be very different. If we think of the immediate innovations that have been happening in the EdTech space, the first one could be gamification, where now students are immersed in a gamified experience. They solve questions, they collect badges, they get trophies for those of us who are on Duolingo and others, and compete with other friends in a gamified manner. There has also been the introduction of the social learning element in education, where students are globally interconnected with each other, talking to peers, building bonds, asking each other questions, and all of that. And there's also been quite a good amount of innovation in the assessment experience, where students get assessed, they solve questions, they get an immediate response to how they're doing, and that has certainly come a long way. Yet, I genuinely believe that education is still a very long way from where it's going to be. And I see it kind of like how we're seeing this picture, where we're judging the ability of a fish, we're judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree, instead of looking at every single individual's unique abilities and strengths. I believe that the future is going to have individualized learning journeys and learning patterns for every student based on their own learning ability, their cognitive skills, and their areas of strength. If we think of the best player, the best chess player out there, it's not a human being. It's the AI and the machine. And with all the data that's being collected, it's become impossible for a human being to beat the computer at a game of chess. So I'm going to make a bold statement right now. The AI of Edtech will be far superior to the best tutor any of us know. And I'm going to give you like a simple real-life example of what I mean by that. Let's assume some students get a question in class, very simply 3 + 1, and you can answer 1, 2, 3, or 4. And let's assume that this student answers incorrectly by choosing 2. What happens in this case? The platform analyzes the answer of this student that selected 2 for 3 + 1, and the platform may assume that this student has actually thought that 3 + 1 is a subtraction function instead of an addition function, leading to an answer of 2. And then if we think of student C, the student could have assumed that it's a multiplication function instead of addition, so 3 times 1 equals 3, hence selecting C. And student D that answered 4 is the one who got it correct. And then probably student A that answered 1 doesn't know the basics of math and needs to learn everything all over again. But what happens then? The platform would go on for student B and check by asking another question to confirm whether they truly have a misunderstanding between subtraction and addition. And once that happens, assuming that the student actually didn't understand the difference between addition and subtraction, the platform would go on and on and on, asking the student a follow-up question, making sure that that student understood the concept, and then catering the learning journey step by step to make sure that this student truly understands the difference between addition and subtraction. And this is only for one simple question of 3 + 1. Now imagine how things look like for a classroom of 30 students. Do you think that the teacher will be able to follow up on an individualized learning journey for every single student in that classroom? Probably not. And if it were to happen, can you imagine how the learning pattern or the logic tree that I just showed you is going to look like? Probably like this. Let's take a step back to traditional schooling and assume that a student got a question of 3 + 1 and selected 2. What do they get? They just get this. I genuinely believe that the days of elitist education that's concentrated for a small group of students in the world that's extremely expensive are over. The future will have the best quality education for the masses, for students at scale, at an affordable price, giving the highest quality possible, thanks to the power of technology. Now, here's a story that I used to share with my team earlier on. That's a bit close to my heart. This region that we're in used to be one of the most promising regions hundreds or thousands of years ago, leading in innovations in science, in technology, in algebra, in math, and all of that. And then, for different reasons, we actually fell behind as a region for quite a while. But then you fast forward to the year 2100, and all of a sudden you see a region that's flourishing with innovation, with art, with science, with manufacturing, and everything around that. And this historian comes in and just tries to understand what actually happened in this part of the world that transformed a region that was lagging behind for a few centuries at least, to propel within like the span of 80 to 100 years to get to a point where it's flourishing the way it is in the year 2100. And then this historian finds out that in the decade between 2020 and 2030, there was a wave of edtech startups that came about, leveraging the power of technology and delivering the best education to students. And it goes beyond that. That led to the radical transformation of how people think, behave, research, interact with one another, leading to an upcoming generation of new thinkers, artists, innovators, and scientists that at some point became parents. And then these parents were a better standard for the generations to come, one generation after the other, propelling very fast to get to a point where within the span of 8 years, the region got to a point where it is that strong and that prosperous. I'll leave you probably with this final thought that was inspired by Steve Jobs. This is a study that happened a couple of decades ago that was measuring the efficiency of living creatures. So essentially, it was measuring the calories spent by a living creature per kilogram for every kilometer traveled. And what that study found was that the condor bird was the most efficient living creature, spending the least amount of energy for the distance traveled. And in the bottom quartile came the mouse and came the human being. Yet, here's the interesting caveat. Here's the interesting caveat. There was an introduction of a tool, and this tool was the bicycle. And once the human being invented the bicycle, it took the human being from all the way of the bottom of the study to become the most efficient living creature of spending energy per distance traveled, beating that condor bird. And why did Steve Jobs refer to that? Because his argument was that the computer will be the bicycle of human minds. Now, I'm going to leave you with one more thought from my side, that I believe Edtech will be the bicycle for learning and for human intelligence. And I genuinely believe that together we'll be able to foster the region, build for a better future, and unleash the human potential of our region. Thank you very much.